Chapter 7. Anthony. She didn't believe me, and I didn't blame her. In the human world, dragons didn't exist. In fact, they were considered mythological creatures written into ancient fables. In fact, those stories were most likely written by humans who'd seen one of my ancestors. You're kidding, right? Charity's gorgeous dark eyes flashed with a depth of emotion I hadn't expected. Tell me the truth. I just did. I shrugged. I saw that man hurt you and I wanted to. I shook my head. She didn't need to hear about my murderous instincts in relation to protecting her. I may have thrown him into that brick wall a little too hard, but I didn't hang around to see if he survived. I wanted to get you somewhere safe. Safe? Charity repeated the word and paused as if considering it. Then she lifted an eyebrow at me. Well, I'm sure he got what was coming to him. I agreed, but didn't say anything more. I could tell she was trying to process everything, not an easy feat with a head injury, let alone when what was being said probably sounded fantastical. If you'd never known shifters or magic, it was a pretty big leap of faith. So where am I? She asked, looking around. In your castle or something? I smirked a little at her incredulous tone. Every eligible woman in my town would have been ecstatic to be in a room alone with me, with a bed in clear sight. But apparently not my mate. She clearly wasn't impressed by my birthright. Well, yes. Though technically, I suppose this is my parents' castle. They still reign, and I'm not the crown prince. My older brother Karlak will be king one day. Not me. I don't believe you. She sat up straighter and glared at me, with all the fire of a woman who'd been lied to and was getting rather annoyed about that fact. I gestured to the window. It's the middle of the night, so you won't be able to see the whole town right now, but feel free to look out. Charity threw back her bed covers and twisted slowly until her feet touched the floor. Her gasp was audible as she looked down at herself and said, "What am I wearing?" I tried not to laugh as I walked over to the window and drew the curtains back for her. One of my sister-in-law's gowns, I believe. Don't worry, that was my mother's doing, not mine. Charity walked to the window and stared out. We were 20 stories above the town, and, in the darkness, it was hard to see any detail, even with my enhanced dragon sight. She huffed out a breath. I can't see a thing. Determined not to be thought of as a liar, I marched over to the main door. Come see the castle, then. Or you can wait for morning. Either way, you'll find out I'm telling the truth soon enough. She narrowed her eyes at me and lifted her head. I was pretty sure she would have stormed up to me, all indignation and fire, if she'd been able to. I could imagine her poking a firm finger against my breastbone and telling me off, and I had to hold back a laugh at the imagined scene. She had some fire, this one, which only made her even more desirable in my eyes. Or at least, she would have fire if she were operating at her full capacity. She swayed a little, then moved toward me slowly. Are you all right? I asked, studying her tentative movements. You took a lot of knocks tonight. She nodded, but her lips pressed into a thin line. I opened the door and took her elbow as she reached me. One short walk, then back to bed. I don't want you passing out again. Again? I passed out? Her voice was slightly breathless. Yes, once we got to a higher altitude. I'm not sure if it was fear or your injuries, but I was worried about you for a good few hours. We took a few steps before she stopped. I don't think I can. I'll have to see the rest in the morning. She sagged and I grabbed for her, sweeping her into my arms and marching back to her room. I'm not making a move, I said, trying to be stern. You just looked like you were going to fall down. She lay her head on my shoulder and sighed. It felt so right to have her in my arms. I was. Thank you. I wouldn't have made it back on my own. I placed her back in her bed and tucked her beneath the warm covers. You're not used to having help, are you? She closed her eyes, effectively shutting me out. I don't usually need help. I brushed her hair back off her forehead, unable to not touch her when she was this close. Well, tonight, just take it. Okay? She nodded, though her eyes remained closed. Okay. My room is a few flights of stairs down. Do you think you'll be all right here if I leave you now? She opened her eyes, and, for the first time since the attack, there were tears shimmering in her eyes. I'll be fine. I just need to sleep. The sight of those tears did something to my insides. I felt all squeezed tight, like it was difficult to breathe, and I couldn't stop myself from leaning forward to press a gentle kiss against her hair. Instead of recoiling as I half expected her to, she lifted her chin and met my lips with her own. Desire burned in my gut, and although I desperately wanted to kiss her deeply, the last thing I wanted was to take advantage of her when she was injured. But the imprint of her lips on mine stayed with me, even after I managed to stand straight once more. My dragon roared inside my head, wanting, needing his mate. No, I told him. Now is not the time. Good night, Charity, I managed. Then I turned and fled, shutting her door quietly behind me. I leaned against the wall in the hallway outside, my head back and my eyes closed. My heart hammered as aggressively as a dragon's wings in war, and I wasn't sure I'd ever feel the same. My mate was strong and beautiful and fierce, but she was also soft and tender. My dragon was already in love, ready to claim her as ours, forever. But I had a hard job ahead of me. She wasn't of this world, and she certainly wouldn't just fall into my bed and my heart without a second thought. She would need to be wooed and reassured, and I didn't even know exactly what she needed, but I was certain our path to happiness would not be straight or easy. I stood up straight and walked down the stairs to my bedroom. My dragon wanted me to sleep on the floor outside of her room and protect her like the treasure she was. But how creepy would that be if she woke up before me and then practically fell over my sleeping form as she tried to leave her room? She already thought me a liar. I didn't want to make her believe anything else bad about me. I managed to reach my room, strip off, and climb into bed without running back to her. She was safe in my mother's old room. Safer than anywhere else in the world, human or dragon. My mother's magic filled every room and hallway of this castle. And even though the servants loved her, they also feared her power. No harm would come to my mate while my mother was queen. And I would destroy anyone who tried to harm a hair on my beautiful mate's head. I managed a few restless hours of sleep before I was up, dressed, and heading back up the stairs to see if Charity was well enough to go for a walk. When I reached the door, Mom was walking out. When she saw me, she held a finger to her lips as though shushing me. "She's still sleeping," Mom said, once she'd shut the door behind her. "Okay, I'll wait." I stood beside the door like a soldier. I wasn't letting her wake up to an empty room and no help. Mom nodded. "I understand. The fated mate bond is very strong. You won't want to leave her at all." I crossed my arms over my chest. "Then why does it sound like you have something unpleasant to say about it?" She grimaced. "Because my visions of your future haven't changed, Anthony. Until you accept your magic, embrace it, you're both on a hazardous path." I stared down at the carpet at my feet, anger rising inside my chest. I hated my magic. It made me different from every other shifter. Even worse, it made me dangerous, which my mother had just admitted seeing in her visions. If I ever lost control, I could hurt those I cared about. Kill them even. How could she not understand that my magic was a weakness rather than a strength? Mother, you're a powerful sorceress. You can get rid of my magic, I'm sure of it. I flicked my gaze back up to hers, staying as calm as I could. I've never asked you for help before, but I'm asking now. Consult your books. See if you can take away my curse. Mom gaped at me. It's not a curse. It's a gift. And Anthony, you are far more powerful than you know. I scowled at her. Yeah, so powerful I'll likely kill my mate someday. No, thank you. If this is a gift, I don't want to accept it. I want it gone. Mom lifted her chin. All right. If that is truly what you want, I'll see what I can do. Thank you. She took a step away from the door, then froze. I think Charity is awake, she said, but in truth, she hadn't needed to tell me. I could instantly sense the connection with Charity grow stronger as she woke. Bring her down for breakfast, would you? Then she was gone. I stared at the door to my mate's bedroom, my gut tight with anticipation. Today was the first day of the rest of my life. With her. I just had to convince my human mate that it was also the first day of hers, and that it would be a good thing, not something to fear. Chapter 8. Charity. I was still inside this strange room. It was beautiful, that was for sure, but unlike any bedroom I'd ever seen before. Knock, knock, knock. Come in, I called out, before really thinking about who I was inviting into my room. The door opened, and the man of my dreams, quite literally, walked in. Good morning. I smiled at Anthony, trying to control my body's response to his presence, and failing. My cheeks burned with the shame of it. Hi. He smiled at me. Mom asked me to invite you downstairs for breakfast. Are you feeling well enough? I checked my body. I need to go to the bathroom first, but yes. Breakfast would be lovely. Anthony indicated a door behind him. There's an attached bathroom here, with a large tub and shower. Please take your time, and I'll wait out in the hall. Thank you. He turned and headed for the door. My gaze swung down to his arse and the way his slacks clung to him. Wow. As soon as the door was shut, I got up and carefully made my way to the bathroom. I was still sore, but I felt a lot more energetic than I had last night, and less like I was about to topple over. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, a stranger staring back. Holy shit! What the hell happened? I was pale and wan. I had bruising around my right eye and dried blood in my hair. I looked like I'd been pulled through a hedge backwards and then thrown in front of a truck. How am I even alive? The answer was clear. Someone had saved me from a fate worse than death, or perhaps death had been Barry's intention. I didn't know. I didn't remember all the details. I glanced longingly at the shower. I had to wash the blood out of my hair. I couldn't go to breakfast, potentially with members of some strange royal family, with blood clinging to my scalp. I unlaced the bodice on the dress and dropped the heavy garment to the floor. Whoa! It must be cold here if that's what they wear every day. Had Anthony really carried me to some other town? How had he done that? A brief image of being up high, of air rushing past my face, intruded, but I tamped it down. No. Don't go there. Don't think about anything except what's in front of me right now. I shook my head to clear any lingering worries as I gingerly walked into the massive tiled shower and turned on the faucet. One thing at a time. The water quickly turned hot, and I turned around and let the stream flow over my head and down my body. There didn't seem to be any shampoo or conditioner, but there was a flower-scented soap, and I used that to scrub my whole body, then applied it to my hair. It was heaven to remove the blood and emerge clean and fresh. I turned the shower off and found a neat pile of towels near the door. I could already feel my energy fading a little, so I dressed again in the lovely sky-blue gown, but I couldn't manage all the intricate lacing. Eventually I gave up and walked back to the door that led to the hallway. When I opened it, Anthony was there, waiting for me as he'd promised. His smirk told me I looked like a drowned duck. "What?" I said. "It's not like I have this sort of dress in my wardrobe. Where are my clothes?" His grimace told me all I needed to know. "Fine," I grunted. "Do you know how to fix this?" I gestured to all the strings and ties, and he nodded. With expert efficiency, he laced me up, then stepped back. His fingers had been brisk, and yet he'd lit a path of fire with every touch. Did he feel that strange connection too? "Do I want to know how you know your way around women's clothing?" I raised an eyebrow, and he had the grace to lightly blush. "You can ask." His smirk lifted one side of his lips. "But do you really want to know the answer?" I grinned at him. "Touché." "Let's go." He offered me his elbow like a gentleman from a historical movie. I took his arm, because how could I not? Then I remembered our strange conversation last night about where we were. "Weren't you going to show me the view?" I taunted. I was sure we were just inside some beautiful mansion outside the city centre, and I would see familiar landscape when I checked outside. They had bluestone historical homes near where I lived. Not many, but they were around. This was likely one of those. "Sure," he said with a big smile, leading me to an arched window that looked out over a view that took my breath away. Oh, my! We were high up. Like, really high up. This was definitely not a bluestone stately home. I stepped closer, pressing my nose to the window so I could stare down at the village below. It didn't look familiar at all, nor did the mountainous skyline beyond the village. "Where are we?" "We're in the Black Mountains," Anthony said. "My family rule this kingdom." "Kingdom?" I twisted around to gape at him. "Where's here? What country?" He pressed his lips together and his nostrils flared. I put my hands on my hips. "Well?" "You're in a realm not far from the town you live in. We passed through a hidden portal last night. We call it a veil that sits between your world and ours." "We're in a—" I gulped, then swallowed hard. Was he saying that he'd taken me to some sort of time-travel world or something? Another realm? "What's with all the medieval clothes and stuff?" I said, gesturing to the dress I wore and trying to grasp onto something concrete. "The clothes are designed mostly for the weather. It gets cold here," he explained. "We like a simple life, but we have modern conveniences also." I nodded, registering the fact that I'd used a very modern bathroom only minutes before. "Okay, but—" Anthony put out his elbow again. "Can I answer more questions at breakfast? My parents will be waiting." His parents? "You mean the king and queen of this place?" He chuckled. "Yes. Let's go." I let him lead me down the stairs, along a hallway, and down another set of stairs. "How big is your home?" I asked, glancing at everything around me. The furniture, the paintings, the rugs on the stone floors. It really was a castle. "This place is amazing." Anthony chuckled. "It's big. How big? I have no idea." He pushed open a large carved door and preceded me into a large dining room with a roaring fireplace. Wow! I stared at the stone dragon carvings around the fire and the portrait atop the mantel. A man and a woman, with 2 small sons. It was glorious. There was no other word for it. Marianne walked toward me, a huge smile on her face. "Nice to see you up and moving, Charity. Are you feeling better?" I nodded. "A lot better, thank you." A man walked toward us, slightly taller than Anthony, and with an aura about him that wasn't quite as warm. Hardened was the word that came to mind when I stared at him. Anthony's father. Which meant he must be the king. I stepped closer to Anthony, and the king stopped beside Marianne. "Charity, this is my father, King Eric." I nodded my head, not sure if I should curtsy, or even if I knew how to curtsy. "So nice to meet you." "And I, you." His tone was more formal than I'd expected. "Come eat." Marianne reached for my hand and pulled me toward the massive table. "If there's anything you'd like in particular that isn't here, please let us know." I gawked at the spread before me. Is it Christmas Day or something here?" Anthony snorted out a laugh while Marianne frowned. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." Anthony held out a chair for me. "This is a normal breakfast for us." "No way!" I shook my head as I stared at the plethora of food in front of us. "This is more food than my mum would make on our birthdays and Christmas combined." Not to mention the fact that, for me, breakfast was usually a coffee on the way to work. At 1 p.m. in the afternoon, because I always seemed to work nights. Everyone sat down and began loading up their plates with pancakes and fruit. Roast meats and potatoes. Pies and stews. I didn't even know where to begin. "It's perhaps my fault that we eat so well," King Eric began, his deep tone even more pronounced now. "I didn't grow up in the castle." "Dad grew up poor and starving," Anthony said, cutting to the chase. "He's always made sure that my brother and I were well fed, and he changed all the laws in the kingdom once he became king, so that no one goes hungry. Not in our town." I shivered at the emotion behind the words. Anthony was proud of his dad, and I could see why. I simply couldn't imagine the huge man in front of me starving as a child, but it brought a tightness to my chest to even think about it. I swallowed hard. "It sounds like you turned something horrible into a blessing for everyone else. That is something to be commended." The king didn't say anything, but his lips turned up in his first smile since I'd entered the room. "Please, eat," Marianne said, and I reached for the closest thing, a pot of jam and a plate of warm bread rolls. I pulled open the bread and smothered the warm crunchiness in what smelled like fresh raspberries. When I bit into it, I groaned. "Wow, that's amazing." Marianne smiled. "Our cooks are talented." I took another bite and managed to swallow before saying, "I've worked in restaurants for 10 years, and this is top quality." "Try some of the meat," Anthony said, gesturing to the platter not far from me. "It's impressive." I dug in, eating as much as I would on Christmas Day, enjoying both the flavours of the food and the simple questions they asked about my work and my family. "So, how far is my apartment from here?" I asked, glancing at Anthony, then Marianne. "I mean, assuming I believe your story about dragons and flying me here, which I can't believe I'm saying out loud, but how far is it to home?" I laughed to show I was joking, and Marianne looked at her husband with a secretive smile. "She sounds just like Lucy." "Who's Lucy?" I asked, taking another heavenly bite of roasted sweet potato. "She's a human who married the king in a neighbouring kingdom," Marianne explained. "She was pretty shocked to find out that we existed." Okay. "And did her king save her from a bad guy too?" Eric snorted, and I looked at him in surprise. He coughed to clear his throat. "No, Stavrock stole Lucy from her doorstep." "He stole her," I repeated. "Like, kidnapped her?" Lucy. Lucy. That name sounded familiar somehow. Marianne giggled. Yes, exactly like that. She tells the story the best, so we'll have to take you to visit her soon. I glanced at Anthony, then back at his mum. Well, that would be nice, but aren't you taking me home today? King Eric stared at his son, and I glanced over at Anthony, a sudden sense of dread seating itself in my gut. Anthony? Anthony put down his fork. I was hoping you would stay here for a while, as my guest. Well, I've got to get back to work, I said. Surely he understood that. Do you? He spoke softly, though a little stiffly. I mean, after the attack, can't you call in sick for a few days or something? I didn't like being told what to do, though he was probably right. If I was home, I probably would have been dealing with hospital bills and police right now. I glanced at the Queen. You want me to stay? It seemed so improbable. Why would they want me here? We'd love you to be our guest, Marianne gushed. We have a telephone in the main office and a computer if you need to give someone notice or let them know you won't be in. I could call the restaurant and tell them I was hurt. Find out about Barry. I suppose I could, but I can't guarantee they'll give me the time off. And I had bills to pay, just like everyone else. Not to mention the fact that I still wasn't sure I believed any of the stories I'd been told so far. Please stay, Anthony said. I'll show you our town. I stared at him, the mixture of joy and hope that I always felt around him rising up to smother the dread. I looked away so I could give myself a little breathing space to consider his offer. I hadn't had a vacation in years. And even though this wasn't exactly a holiday destination I'd ever heard of, what was a day or two out of my boring life? I lifted my head and caught Anthony's gaze once more. All right. If I get the okay from work, I'll stay for a few days. Thank you. Anthony smiled, but there was a strange stiffness to him again that I couldn't place. His parents looked relaxed and happy at my news. But my gut told me that this situation was more complicated than it looked. Only, I couldn't figure out why. Chapter 9. Anthony. My dragon shifter was angry, huffing and puffing inside my chest. I was struggling, once again, to keep him under control. My mate couldn't leave. She couldn't. The very idea that she expected me to take her home was shocking and upsetting in the extreme. Against my best judgment, I reached for my magic and asked it for help. My dragon immediately calmed, and I could think more clearly once more. Are you ready for a tour, then? I stood up and extended my hand. Absolutely. She also stood up and shot me a grin. Got to walk off that enormous breakfast. She turned to thank Mom and Dad for the meal, then glanced at me. Am I appropriately dressed? It's only... She poked her bare foot out from under the gown, and I turned to my mother for advice on that one. Mom? Mom nodded. She'll be fine, though make sure you stop and grab a cloak and a set of boots before heading out. Thanks. Then let's go. I turned, and Charity followed me out of the dining room to the cloakroom near the castle's front entrance. Would you like to see more of the castle? Or should we go straight out into the town? Can you show me how you turn into a dragon? She asked, her voice as clear as day. Her request shocked me into silence. Well? She asked after I was quiet for too long. You said you were a dragon, right? I nodded. Then show me. Her grin said she didn't think I could do it. I can, I said. But you have to promise not to freak out, especially since you asked me to shift. This was a bad idea, I could tell. But there was only one way forward, and convincing her that I was a dragon was the first step in explaining fated mates, and everything else I had to tell her. She grinned at me, her eyes sparkling with mischief. She was about to get a huge shock. I dragged in a deep breath, then nodded. "Okay, let's go into the courtyard then." We grabbed her a cloak and boots, and then I marched toward a side door and pushed it open. Charity followed me with a frown on her face. "Aren't we going on a tour?" "You just asked me to show you my shifter. Which do you want to do first? Shifter display or tour?" A touch of impatience threaded into my tone, and her eyebrows flicked upward. "I was only teasing," she said. I groaned. "No, you weren't. You were wanting to prove that I'm a liar. And you're gonna keep thinking that until you see the truth with your own eyes. So, you can see the town first, or we can just get this part over and done with now." She tilted her head, uncertainty clouding her eyes. Are you serious?" I nodded and stormed toward the center of the courtyard. No matter how many times I told her the truth, she wouldn't believe me. I began to strip, pulling off my jacket, my shirt, and my shoes. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, still standing with one foot inside the doorway. "I'm showing you the truth. Dragons are not made-up creatures. They are very real, and you are visiting a country where almost every person you meet is a shifter. When I shift, my clothes shred, so I'm removing them for after. I will leave my trousers on for now. For you." She crossed her arms over her chest and glared at me. "Fine. Show me." "Do not be afraid," I declared, letting my dragon rise to the surface of my consciousness. "I am fully aware in my shifter form. I'm not going to hurt you, and you can talk to me just as you are now. I will understand you." She rolled her eyes. I wanted to roll mine straight back, but instead I let go of my humanity. My body grew, my scales sprouted, and my chest filled with fire as my senses exploded with shifter acuteness. I smelled fear and heard her terrified shriek. I opened my eyes and Charity was plastered to the door. I had to reassure her, but shifting back so fast felt wrong. I bent my front legs and lay my head on the stones. My shifter heart ached to see Charity so distressed, but she would need to accept all of me as my fated mate, not just the human side. Charity dropped to the ground and curled into a ball, her arms around her legs as she rocked back and forth. I made a purring sound, which probably sounded more like a growl to her, but I was hoping it came across well. If she didn't calm down soon, I would need to shift back. Her head came up a little at my purr, and her watery eyes stared at me. I stayed in my submissive pose, wishing she would stand up and touch me. As though my thoughts had encouraged exactly that, Charity pushed up on unsteady legs and stared at me, her fingers grasping the door behind her. "Anthony, is that really you?" Despite her fear, her voice was strong. I nodded my head the best I could without getting up. She staggered forward, wiping the tears away. "How is this possible?" I stayed very still, wishing her closer. Charity took another step toward me, then extended her hand. "May I touch you?" I nodded my head again and didn't move. She took another step, her hand trembling. She bit her lip, and I closed my eyes, not wanting to scare her. Her fingers touched my shoulder lightly, acutely aware of each of her strokes over my scales as she grew bolder and pressed even closer. I can't believe it." She was whispering, but my hearing was sharper in dragon form, and I picked up every nuance. Her shock, her fear, and her wonder. Both of her hands touched my side now, moving toward my wings. I tried not to move, but it was almost impossible. As soon as her fingers touched the delicate webbing, I gasped, my wings shivering in a strange blend of ticklish pain and delight. She jumped back. "Oh, I'm sorry." It was time to shift to human. I let go of my dragon form, though he begged to stay and get to know our mate. Then I was naked and in a kneel on the stones in front of her. When I looked up, Charity was staring straight at me, her mouth open. I stood up, aware of how her hungry gaze slid over my aroused body. I wouldn't hide my desire for her, which was lucky as, in this state, there was no way I could. "You didn't hurt me," I managed. "My wings are sensitive." She nodded, and then her eyes dropped to my erection. She laughed lightly. "Clearly." Then she gulped as if her own forwardness had shocked her, glancing behind to the door. "Would you like some more clothes?" I scooped up the pants that I'd torn and said, "The servants have cloaks. I'll just grab one." I went to move past her and she grabbed my bare arm. "You can't go into the castle like that." I couldn't help but laugh at the shock in her tone. "Every staff member is also a dragon shifter. Nudity doesn't offend anyone. It is normal and natural and part of being a shifter." My arm tingled where she touched me, but I moved forward and stepped inside the palace once more. "A cloak, please." One of the nearby guards retrieved one for me, and I slipped it on quickly. The door closed behind me, and I turned to see Charity step inside once more. My discarded shirt and shoes were in her hands. I wasn't exactly dressed for a town tour now. "I need to redress. Would you like to wait here for me?" She nodded and shoved the clothes at me. I took them, then drew her to sit down on one of the chairs in the foyer. "I won't be long. Would you like a cup of tea? Or something stronger?" Tea. Yes." I called over a servant and indicated to Charity. "Get her anything she wants. I'll be back momentarily." I gave her fingers a reassuring squeeze and turned tail. I reached my bedroom in record time, dressed quickly, then rushed back to her side. Half of me expected to find her gone. So, when I found her still sitting on the same chair, a cup of tea in her hand, my hammering pulse began to slow down. "You're still here." I was unable to hide my relief. "Where am I going to go?" She took a sip of what I assumed was a fortified cup of tea. "If you were telling the truth about the dragon shifter thing, then you're telling the truth about everything. About us being in a different realm. About me being unable to get home without your assistance." I held out my hand, and she placed her tea on a side table and took my offered hand. "Come, see the city. Then you can decide if it's such a terrible thing that you're here with us." A guard opened the front door for us. As soon as we stepped out of the castle, the cold air hit us, and she shifted closer, pressing her body against mine. "It's snowing," she said, holding out her hand to catch a stray snowflake. "I've never seen real snow before." "It's only a light sprinkle," I replied. "Today, at least. Let's do a short walk and see how you go. If it gets too cold, then we'll go back." She nodded, and together we walked down the main street and around the town, looking at the houses and shops and enjoying the bustle of people as they went about their daily business. "You said that your father makes sure no one here goes without food," she said, when we walked past a small vegetable cart. "How does he do that, exactly?" "Well, one of the first things he did for our kingdom was to lift all the taxes and supply everyone with free electricity, heating and water. The necessities. Next was food. The new council know who in town needs a helping hand, and we provide what they need. Our people work hard, and they rarely need handouts, especially with their basic needs taken care of." Charity stared up at me, then shook her head, focusing back on the road. "Wow, that's amazing." I feel like I work night and day just to pay the mortgage most weeks. It must be amazing to know that you'll always have a home and be able to keep the lights on." It was my turn to frown down at her. "You don't enjoy your work." I'd assumed she must, given she wanted to go back to it, but if she didn't, well, that would make her transition to living here much easier. Her lips twisted as she thought on her answer. "I do, but if I suddenly didn't have to work to pay the bills, would I still do it? Hell no!" That was exactly what I wanted to hear. She'd mentioned a little of her family over breakfast, but I wasn't sure how close she was with them. Would she miss them living here? "Do you see your family much?" I asked, assuming, of course, that she was unmarried. Surely fate wouldn't have sent me a woman who wasn't available. "I don't see them a lot," she answered, her voice soft and slightly reflective. "My parents live a few hours away." "Have you seen enough of the town for now?" I asked, stopping at a fork in the road where we could choose to continue to walk or head back. "Yes, I'm a bit tired, actually." "This way," I said, directing her back up the hill toward the castle. "Would you like to rest?" She was looking paler by the moment. When she nodded, I twisted and picked her up in my arms. "You've got to stop doing that," she said, but she didn't fight me. Quite the opposite. She lay her head on my shoulder and sighed. "When you stop looking like you're going to fall down, I'll stop picking you up." She laughed lightly, but didn't lift her head. I got her back to the castle as quickly as I could and walked her up every flight of stairs until we reached her room. The continuing silence was too much. As I lay her on the bed, I tried to make conversation. "Did you know these used to be my mother's chambers before my parents married?" "You said your mom isn't a shifter." She sounded curious, but her eyes were closing. She'd obviously pushed her limits with the long walk. "No, she's something different." I pulled the blankets up over Charity, clothes and all. I didn't think now was the time to tell her about my mum being a sorceress. "You can ask more questions later. You need to rest." "I need to call my work," she said, but didn't move. "You can when you wake up again." I wanted to reassure her and leaned in to press a kiss to her forehead. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she whispered, but her eyes were still closed, so I could stare at her without her noticing. She was so beautiful, so delicate, so precious. "Because you're my mate." "Because you're our guest," I said, chickening out of telling her the whole truth about our situation. "Sleep. I'll come get you when lunch is ready." She didn't answer, so I had to assume she was already asleep. I crept out and shut the door, a wave of relief passing over me at the knowledge that she'd seen and seemed to accept my dragon form. We'd gotten over that first hurdle, but I was under no illusions. We still had many more to go before I could be confident that Charity would stay with me. My dragon hadn't sent her running, but my magic might. And even if she accepted that too, would she quickly change her mind when she found out that my mother had foretold her fiery death at the hands of my magic? Chapter 10. Charity. I woke up slowly, my head amazingly dream-free. I still wasn't sure if the man I'd met in real life had any connection to my dream prince, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. How embarrassing it would be if he knew what sort of dreams I'd been having about him. Especially if my dream man was simply a figment of my imagination, and I was projecting some of his qualities onto Anthony because he'd rescued me from the attack by Barry. I pushed the bed covers off me. They were too hot and heavy now. Then I stumbled next door to use the bathroom and wash my face and hands. When I was done, the events of the morning suddenly hit me, and I began to giggle, sounding strangely intoxicated. "He's a dragon! Like a real dragon!" On one level, I couldn't really believe it, but everything I'd seen so far was real. His scales, his wings. The gorgeous little town that I'd walked around this morning was straight out of a fairy tale. And this castle, it was huge and like nothing from my own life. It was possible that I'd been knocked unconscious and was in some sort of complicated long-term coma dream, but it didn't feel like it. Especially when, every time I saw Anthony, a frisson of desire rippled over my skin. That awareness of him, on such a visceral level, felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced before. When I walked back into the bedroom, a female servant was laying a beautiful chocolate-brown dress on the bed. "Hello," I said, walking up next to her and reaching for the crushed velvet. "Wow, this is beautiful." The servant bobbed a little curtsy. "The Queen thought you may want to change. Would you like some help getting into the dress?" The girl, who looked about 16, seemed sweet. "Thank you," I said. "That would be great. I'm Charity, by the way." "Elsa, ma'am." Elsa helped me into the dress that somehow fit to perfection. "How did you know my size?" I asked, brushing my hands over my waist and hips. She smiled. "The Queen guessed your measurements, and then I made this for you. If you would like a different colour or fabric, I can make you another." I grinned at her. "Oh no, this is perfect. Thank you." "But what about tomorrow, ma'am?" Elsa asked, blinking at me. Tomorrow? Was I staying tomorrow as well? "Yes, as Prince Anthony's mate. Surely you would like a whole new wardrobe." The girl stared at me expectantly. "Mate," I repeated, my heart sinking in sudden foreboding. "What does that mean?" Elsa cocked her head and frowned at me. Then she gasped. "Oh, I shouldn't have said anything. You're a human, and you must have different names for things. I misspoke. Please forgive me." She bobbed again and ran from the room. I stared after her, feeling slightly numb and a little stupefied at the same time. "Mate?" I repeated it out loud. "She doesn't mean like a friend or—" I shook my head. I knew next to nothing about this world, and I needed to ask Anthony what she meant. Memories of Anthony's beautiful purple-blue eyes within the dreams I'd had before I met him came back to haunt me. I needed to find out more about that, too. So many questions, so much uncertainty. Work! I couldn't believe I'd forgotten. I had to find a phone. There was a knock at the door, and I walked forward and pulled it open. There was my dream man, right in front of me. Oh, the things I've dreamed those lips have done to me. "Lunchtime," I managed, though my voice caught in my throat. He inclined his head in a short nod, watching me carefully, but he didn't say anything as I walked out of my room. "Can you take me straight to your phone?" "Sure." He'd stiffened up again, as he did every time I talked about home. I made a mental note to ask him about that later, but right now I needed to focus on the phone call. He led me along a warren of hallways to a large and light-filled office. I was surprised to find a modern computer, desk, and multiple cell phones plugged into the power board. "Wow, you guys might live in a castle and wear medieval clothing, but you're really set up in a tech sense." His grin was brief and disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. He gestured to the bank of cell phones. "Please, use whatever you need." His arm was vibrating strangely, so I let go of him, picked up one of the phones and called the restaurant. Tanya answered. "Tanya, it's Charity. How's everything going there?" "Charity! Oh my God, you're all right! Thank goodness! Where are you? What happened?" I pulled out the desk chair and sat down, noting the fact that Anthony was hanging around and appeared to be listening intently. "I'm away," I hedged. "I was attacked after work the other night, and someone found me and saved me." There was silence on the phone. Then Tanya whispered, "Was that the night one of our diners was attacked? Barry, I think his name was." "I'm not sure," I said, my stomach tight with tension. "I don't remember much, because I was hit in the head multiple times." "Why? What happened to Barry?" "You were hit in the head?" Tanya exclaimed. "By who?" "I don't know," I lied. "But it could have been the same person. What happened to Barry?" "He was attacked too," Tanya said. "He's unconscious in hospital at the moment, with a cracked skull and broken ribs. They don't know if he's going to come out of the coma or not." I closed my eyes, a strange wave of feeling washing over me. Was it happiness or apprehension? I wasn't sure, but I wasn't sorry that Barry had been so badly injured. Not when I knew what he'd tried to do to me. "That's no good," I managed at last. "When are you coming back?" Tanya asked. "The restaurant's been struggling without you." My gut twisted this time, guilt hitting me hard. I probably need another day, Tanya. I'm still recovering from the attack." "Oh, shit. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I didn't think about that. I'll tell the big bosses that you need a week, and that'll make them send another manager from the city. Or should I say 2 weeks? Then they definitely won't say no." I opened my mouth to say that I didn't need a week, let alone 2. But Anthony wandered over to the desk, his eyebrows raised high. I could sense his interest in the discussion, and it made me hesitate. "Tell them I need 2 weeks, Tanya," I said with a gulp, as I turned away from Anthony's intent look and focused on the book-lined wall to one side of the desk. "Then at least they'll send you a decent manager. If I'm better sooner than that, I'll just come back in." That was the best solution. It gave me some time to work out what I'd fallen into over here, and my restaurant and the staff would be well handled. "Ask for Marie," I added. "She's tough, but fair." "No problem," Tanya said. "I will. You just get better, Charity. Don't worry about us." I huffed out a laugh. "I always worry about you, Tanya." She giggled into the phone. "I'm fine. Oh, I have to go. Delivery truck is here." "Okay, go. Talk to you later," I said, and she hung up seconds later. I sat still for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. They were fine without me. They wanted me there, sure. I made things easier for them all, but they'd survive without me, right? 2 weeks. Anthony's hopeful voice sounded in the room. I put the cell phone down, turned in the swivel chair, and stood up. Yes, but that was more for the sake of my staff than anything else. If I have less than a week off, my bosses won't replace my shifts. They'll just expect the staff to pick up the slack, and they can't. They need a manager. "I'm glad you're going to stay a bit longer," Anthony said, his voice soft now. Almost too quiet. "I was worried after this morning that you might wake up from your nap and demand to be taken home." "Why?" I asked, shaking out my heavy skirts. "Because you turn into a dragon." I shrugged. I'd dreamed of a lot worse things to admit. "It's all good. Lunch?" Anthony's eyes widened as if I'd shocked him, but then he nodded and we walked to the dining room, where a table was set for 2. "Your parents aren't joining us?" He held out a chair, and I sat down, admiring the simple yet beautiful fare. "My parents flew to a neighbouring kingdom after breakfast this morning to visit my older brother who's living there with his wife at the moment." I nodded as though I understood, though I didn't. "So all the princes and princesses marry each other? To keep the royal bloodlines pure or something like that?" Anthony chuckled and reached for the jug of water. "Hardly. We each marry our fated mate, if we're lucky enough to find them. My brother just happened to be fated to a princess, whereas Prince Anselm just married a human woman, actually. Someone from your world." He gulped and stopped talking, as if suspecting that he'd said too much. I stared at him, my heart pounding a little faster. There was so much to unpack now. From the look on his face, he hadn't meant to blurt all that out, but it was obvious there was no subterfuge in his response. What's a fated mate? That was my first and most important question. Anthony began scooping food onto his plate, dropping his gaze so he was no longer looking at me. It's the word we use for the person you're meant to marry. The one fate has chosen for you. Together, you're perfect. Like a soulmate. Two halves of the one whole. There was so much emotion in his voice, I struggled to hold myself together. Was that what the maid had been talking about? I took an even breath and carefully asked, "Do you have a fated mate, Anthony?" His gaze came up and clashed with mine, purple mist swirling in his blue eyes, like magical fog. My breath caught in my throat at the answer in his eyes. No, it couldn't be. "But I'm human," I whispered. "You can't mean—" "Yes, it's you." There was a deep growl behind his words. When he stood up, his chair scraped on the floor and he leaned forward, a soft rumble echoing in the room. It sounded like a purr, only not like any purr I'd ever heard before. I jumped to my feet and started backing toward the door, the hairs on my neck beginning to prickle. This is just like in my dream. And even though I knew I'd excited the hunter in Anthony, I couldn't stop from turning tail and running from the room. A squeal caught in my throat as I ran down the hallway and raced into a room I'd never been in before. My heart was pounding and my whole body was shaking as I twirled back to face the door. And froze. I'd found the library. The doors banged open behind me and Anthony prowled inside, big and strong and far too sexy for the confined space. My breath was already short. His presence added to that, and I suddenly found it immensely difficult to breathe. I turned to run, and he grabbed me from behind, one arm locking across my chest, the other snaking around my hips. He held me captive against his big body and whispered in my ear, "Why are you running?" I gasped as his voice, like every dream and fantasy I'd had before now, made my insides turn to molten lava. I wriggled against his body, feeling his erection press into the small of my back. "Why are you chasing me?" He spun me around, picked me up, and carried me over to the desk in the center of the room. He set me down, and I opened my legs for him to step between them, our movements as natural as breathing. As though we'd done this dance 1,000 times before. My hands slid up his arms until I could cup his jaw and bring him close. He stopped inches away from my mouth, and I pulled on him, wanting him closer. On top of me. Inside of me. "I have so much I need to tell you." His voice was a whisper, his eyes exactly as I remembered from my dreams. All blue and purple swirls, intense and full of desire. I shuddered with the erotic memories of my dreams gone past. "Later," I whispered back, lifting my chin so that my lips were a breath away from his. "Now, I need you to kiss me." When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were the most purple I'd ever seen them. I cupped his face and stared at them. "God, you're beautiful." He chuckled and gently prized himself out of my arms and back to standing, though he still stayed between my thighs. "You're the one who's beautiful, Charity." He said the words with such reverence, as if he meant it. The way he stroked my body as he spoke made me believe him even more. I smiled up at him, feeling the need to be real and honest. "It was your eyes," I sighed. "I've been dreaming about you for so long. And I knew it was you." "How did you know it was me?" Anthony whispered, already pulling away. I sat up, confused. Because of your eyes. The purple swirls in your eyes.